Hello, everybody. I'm glad we sorted things out there. It's a pleasure to be invited, and I'm very happy to be back on home soil. I don't visit often enough, so I'm very glad to have this invitation, and thank you to the organiser, Stefano. I'm going to share with you lots of ideas effectively, and I'm so glad they're picking up, not just from Henrik's talk earlier today, but from the other contributors too, because my theme is one of the imagination as much as the actual technology of the spaces. To my intense surprise, in 3 days' time, I'll show you in a minute, it's the 55th anniversary of my hearing live electronic music in concert, and I was just starting as a student at the time. I'll come back to that in just a second. So my themes for today, I'm going to try and run through far too much, so I'll try and keep to. I'll put my watch on the table to try and discipline myself to a little certain extent, as you haven't got 3 days to spare. I want to look at ideas, the imagination. Henrik mentioned it. Why do we want to use space at all? What is it about this intrinsic stuff we inhabit that makes us human? It's essentially a humanistic tradition I come from, which I want us to be placed in a real living environment in the way that we can appreciate what sound and music does. In fact, since around 2011, I've been publishing and thinking about this tool. My ICMC 2011 in Huddersfield Keynote was music imagination technology. In fact, I'll return to that theme. And then in Aalborg in 2014, and it was published in the later compendium for Oxford, I looked at the idea of actually the mind as the most powerful synthesizer we have. Not technology at all, but our appreciation of the world. If we think, and by the way, in this sense, I'm going to come back to the relationship of live and acousmatic traditions as well, because I am one who wishes to proactively think about sound, not just respond to the real world sounds, although they will feed me, but to also reflect outwards what I want in the world as well. I've also been doing work recently about feeling sound, how we actually phenomenologically, but more than that, it's how we spiritually and how we physically respond to the sound world around us and the music world around us. I don't really care where sound ends and music begins, but anyway. I wrote an essay in 2022 during the pandemic for a catalogue for Sound Art Brighton, the Global Dérive Flaneur, which is about if you know your flaneur, the insouciant walking of the streets to see what's going on, but you do anything but let on that that's what you're doing. You just go around and appreciate. Whereas the dérive, the situationists, much more actively engage with the street and work out a psychogeography of the area that they are in. And I think psychogeography is a wonderful term, both origin and origin. Imagination, image, and sonic art was another paper I gave. I'm very interested in how images and the imagination fuel what we do. So that was the first. That's actually a photograph of BBC Maida Vale Studios. Two of the people that introduced me to electronic music are both called Smalley, and they're not related to each other. And commentators sometimes get them mixed up when I refer to them both. The first Smalley I met taught me at Cambridge. He was a composer in residence at one of the colleges there, Roger Smalley. Brilliant, I'll return to him in a minute, but his piece called Pulses was for 5 brass groups and live electronics, ring modulation and amplification and things. And here is a photo. I wasn't present at the recording, but I was present on the 20th of June 1969, 3 days' time, 55 years back. And will the autoplay work on? This is a recording made in the 90s. Let's just listen to a second. the early teens of this century, I wrote an article recalling early electronic music listening that I had experienced, probably coloured by 50 years of exaggerated memory, but nonetheless, in quieter sections there is clear movement of the sound. I wrote this in 2016-17, but I have a clear memory of it today. Movement is mapped to transformation. As the sound moves, it changes, not always ring modulated. The sound seems to be literally higher than the instruments, even though I see only slightly raised loudspeakers. This is in itself exciting. I am not immersed in the sound, but a wave is coming towards me without ever actually arriving. And I found that to be very viscerally interesting experience. My imagination moves me forward, and so on. To this day, when you're blown away, it's epiphanic. You come out of the hall a different person than you'd entered. I experienced that at the age of 11 with Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony, and again in 1969 with Roger Smalley's Pulses. A couple of images just to get you into the frame of things. On the right there, Roger Smalley. On the left, Tim Souster playing viola. Robin Thompson and Peter Britton are still with us. Roger and Tim, alas, no longer. They were performing their Stockhausen's very spatial piece, Sternklang, park music. If you don't know it, another view of space, go and look it out. It's terrific. They recorded it. Their group was called Intermodulation, based in Cambridge, live electronics group. Here they are. Roger on the left, Tim on the right. I studied with them at the time, 1968, 9, 71, 2, and I was their roadie. I know all about lifting loudspeakers and plugging things together, I really do. That's my home studio of 1973, 50 years ago, and what the hell, that's what I looked like in 1973 in a publicity shot. Anyway, this is the early 70s. I'm in live electronics, but it's always been performative, spatial, and it's always affected me deeply in my chest cavity and a few other places, no doubt. So the idea of viscerality, of physicality, psychology, all intermixed to me without the ability to separate them. Of course, at that time, I'd come across the acousmatics. I wasn't a born acousmatic. Trevor Wishart and Dennis Smalley, both based in York. Trevor was never part, he was registered at York for a while, but he didn't actually teach there. So he always works there, still is today. I'm working with him on a couple of projects to do with archiving. And Dennis I've known since December 1974, when I did not know at the time. I visited the York studios to find out how the York studios worked, building a studio at City University. And Richard Orton said, Dennis, show Simon the studio and play me your new piece. I didn't know that I was hearing Pont before its first public performance. It's only been completed 2 months, and he gave me a private performance in the studio, another epiphany moment. In the same article, I wrote about that experience in December 1974. I could feel I could reach out to touch the sound. Risky as some seemed very hot, and others razor sharp. Space was articulated by sonic substance, the reality of the impact, something essentially real, yet not recognizable. Somebody else had mentioned that for me, didn't they? Describing the sound's demands of the vocabulary of substances, qualities, and behaviors. Behavior As Dennis himself has said, space is one of the major behaviour factors. So let me leave those early epiphany experiences now and begin to look at the subject. This is a symposium after all, enough of me. The shift from information to imagination is really what I'm about, one of the themes. In the 1980s, we talked about music information technology. It was the new in thing. We set up a course at City. Lots else of you in this room were setting up courses similarly. And I suggested in the 2000s this was moving towards music imagination technology. This is why I used that title in 2011 for Keynote there. The faculty of forming new ideas or images or concepts of external objects not present to the senses. I don't like that definition, actually. I sometimes put dictionary definitions on screen in order to say I think they're completely inadequate, which I think this is, because it doesn't actually deal with perceptions and sensations sufficiently. It's rather a distance kind of OED definition. We can imagine a sound sequence, a scenario, an instrument, a performance, a sense of space, place, movement, and so on, and so on. Our imaginations can grasp all of these things, as several of you have said already, difficult to notate, difficult to capture. And I'm suggesting, I always have suggested, that we've been interested in both live electronic music and the acousmatic tradition of listening modes, how we listen to sounds. I'm interested in mapping those inwards as well, inner listening modes. How do you actually stop in dead silence and hear a sound in detail? Think hard. It's a different kind of listening mode, and one which I think is under-practiced, and the ability to hear sounds internally, and then maybe not externalize them. How do we do it? Can we capture and trap our ideas of sound, let alone I'm being less reactive and more proactive in the ideas I have for wanting to do something with these sounds. Just a couple of references for you. I love the fact that it's Le Corbusier, the great architect of modernism, who quotes Xenakis, not the other way around. Goethe said that architecture was music become stone. From the composer's point of view, this is Xenakis speaking strictly in Le Corbusier's book, could be reversed by saying music is architecture in movement. That said, I want to posit that against a phrase that I absolutely love, and I recommend the book to you. Its English version is 60 years old this year, The Poetics of Space. It was published in French 6 years earlier, Gaston Bachelard. If you read through the titles of the chapters in Poetics of Space, the idea is a post-Freudian. What's a drawer? What's a corner? What's an attic? Not a roof, an attic. What do you store there? What's it mean to have space? And lo and behold, the chapters include, you hardly needed to know, that Bernard Parmigiani uses several Gaston Bachelard quotes in titles of his works. And Dedans dehors is in fact the title, The Dialectics of Inside Outside, is one of Bachelard's. A very interesting book. Do have a look at it. Especially as I love the word poetics. I've probably overused it in recent. So, I'm interested in perspectives, distance, how that changes how we feel. You've got, intimate immensity. I went to the Olympic Stadium in London in 2012, and it was a very strange sensation when those extra reflective things were created, so that you had a sense that the runners many meters away were actually quite close to you. It's quite spooky to change perspective. Very effective in the Olympic Stadium, and they're 12 years later now. So here we have ideas that I wanted to bring into a poetics. And one of my key lines here is Mary Baumeister's phrase, a letter to Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, used as a text in his great work, Momenta. Everything surrounding me is near and far at once, at the same time. It's a kind of very cubist idea, is that you can have nearness and farness together. And that is what, of course, technology allows, and I'm going to move on to that now. I won't be dealing with the techniques of the technology, but how we think about them, I hope. I live in Brighton. There was a strange pandemic, wasn't there, from 1922. We used to go down to the seafront, and you see, to me, this is on my phone, we have these wonderful, there's another little subgroup coming in now, and you see, to me that sounds, it's a silent movie, but I can hear sound. and visuals create sound for me. I've written often that sounds create visuals. I won't bore you with it again, but I'm a bit synesthetic. I listen to an acousmatic concert and I see things. But actually the other way around works too. These are enormous. What, they've got 500,000 starlings in. And it's quite extraordinary motions there. And actually the person I immediately think of is Yanis Xenakis when I see these huge clouds of sound he wrote about. And here is a natural consequence, take back the word consequence, a natural example of the way clouds work. Look at the change in the colour. And somebody pointed out to me that I've actually trapped somewhere. These are anti-predatory, they're keeping out predators. It's quite extraordinary. And those are the natural sound changes. There's no sound here. Sorry. Anyway, so Brighton aside, I'm coming back to Brighton in a minute. You stopped the change of the slides.
I did.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
All right. Yeah. We're running out of time, but I can't, meaning I've got quite a lot to go. So I'm a bit late today. I found this online, as have other people. If you haven't seen the first ever recording in stereo, it's online in the EMI archives. Whether it is the first or not is slightly disputed, but Alan Blumlein arrived in EMI in 1933. He'd been to a movie with his wife, and he'd come out saying, we don't have to have sound from a single loudspeaker in the centre of the image. And he went to work immediately working out how stereo might work. Here it is. It's quite charming. I'll talk over it. 1933 December, I played it on its 90th birthday at a talk I gave in, here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Blumlein used a side-to-side cutter and an up-and-down cutter as the two vectors, orthogonal vectors of stereo. And of course, relatively soon after, there were optical tracks where you could do this a lot more easily. I suspect he used optical tracks as well.
36, 37, 38, 39, 40,
did
41,
do stereo on 78 RPM discs.
46, 47, 48, 49, 50. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday,
Okay,
Monday,
it's the group. How different we perceive it in stereo. It's the first time it's ever been done.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
You can distinguish strings of the days of the week and others.
Friday, Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2.
Anyway, it's a lovely piece of movie. And I wanted to pick up something that Henrik played that mentioned this morning. It's 1 minute long. If you haven't seen The Wizard of Oz, you haven't lived. So any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Watch the dog.
You are really great and powerful. You keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creature!
Dog
Think
pulls back the
yourself lucky
acousmatic curtain.
that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now.
He's using a Westinghouse
The
microphone
great
of
Oz has
1935.
spoken.
Very well-known mic used by Bing Crosby
Pay no
and others.
attention to that man behind the curtain. Look, Wayland, Oz has spoken.
The projection of the wizard into real space is decades ahead
You are.
of its time.
I
They
don't
projected
believe
his
you.
voice into this vast chasm. They projected his image
You
into television. Television in London was 3 years old at the time it was suspended during World War II.
You're a very bad man.
Oh, no, my dear, I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard.
So the idea of projection, changes in perspective, is what our affective, two of you used that word this morning, I better move quite quickly through the next chunk. I've looked at a vocabulary for describing some of these spaces. I wrote that image in the 1990s. I was teaching live electronics and I wanted to try to distinguish between different kinds of live electronic modulation, and I made a distinction between local functions that change the sound of the live electronics. As an immediate thing, you always root it in the live performer, and spatialized field electronics, and I elaborated this steadily throughout the 90s, then realized in about 2010 that all I had done was reinvent the Greek theatre, and that in fact the extraordinary, I have been to Epidavros, and it's more than a 180 degree thing. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. That ain't a 19th century shoebox. We are being brought up on that kind of thing. The performance area is really, it's 110 degrees, I think, around. And it's extraordinary explanation of spatial relationships in that now 2,500-year-old idea. First, I try to then work at it and take it apart a little bit. You've got events on a stage, in an arena, in a landscape. Firstly, technology allows you to scramble all that long. And you can take aside the landscape and put it in a tiny thing, and then you can take the tiny thing and project it in the landscape. You can change all of those parameters. They become ambiguous in our control, live or in the studio. And you can reconfigure them in various ways. Furthermore, with the age of the internet, you have studio omnidirectionality. We don't actually have to have a front or a forward. We can be omnidirectional. That can get quite problematic because humans actually perceive the front 120 degrees much more accurately than the rest behind us. And of course, you've got all space, which moves out to via telecommunications across the globe to the extraterrestrial. Pauline Oliveros, 50 years ago, did a piece bouncing beams off the moon and back with a delay that would cause. Great idea. Fantastic piece. Performer fold back. I wrote an article about this. I won't dwell on it now. I see it as a challenge. How do you get back to a performer what the effect of what they're doing in the space out there? So fold back of space, I put to you as a group as a challenge. How do we communicate it? Well, I think I'll skip this example as time's shifting, but I have always loved Hildegard Westerkamp's idea of, pitch, speech, sound, what you do. The idea of the zoom lens, the microphone as zoom lens, the microphone as microscope. She didn't actually use that expression. But the microphone as something which you look clearly at something. You can then hear it better. You are then changing its perspective with respect to the sound around you. Sadly, I won't. I refer you to that wonderful piece, 1985. The idea of intervening in the soundscape as well, of filtering out the sound of Vancouver City so we can hear the sounds of the barnacles in the sea. I will play a brief extract of this. I'll talk over it probably, so let's go. This recording is actually a Westdeutscher Rundfunk radio recording. Cage was commissioned to do a Hörspiel, a radio piece, and this based on several of his previous works. Cage speaking, reading through Finnegan's Wake, using the E chain to choose which to Irish traditional musicians. He got a band together by Joe Heaney, one of the great Irish. And in the Earcam Commission, multi-loudspeaker setup, multi-channel recording, every single place mentioned in Finnegan's Wake that made a noise. 1300. And use the E chain to put together 2, the Almeida Festival converted a church in North London. These are the images from it. Cage was up in one with galleries. The Irish musicians were dotted around this precarious scaffolding, and we were in the lower bit, wandering around. And there were very things going on at this. So this can be done live, and we did do it live. This recording outside the studio. Changes all of the perspectives within the original recordings. Right, I'm going to keep the next bit quite brief. Perspective. I talked about this, you can reference my talk to EMS 21, and here's our friend the drone. I'm just going to briefly mention another spatial idea, the difference between maps and ways, wayfinding and map reading. I have suggested that we tend to hover above things as composers. And we tend to plan, as mentioned by a couple of you this morning, rather than hover down towards experience. And I will refer you to that other talk. I deal with the idea of experience as a river. It's the same but different when I was talking to you about that. Wayfinding, Tim Ingold says, you don't traverse the surface of a world whose layout is fixed in advance. As represented on a map, you feel your way through a world that is itself in motion, continuously coming into being. And he looks then at the idea of space and time. Thus do places enfold the passage of time. They are neither of the past, present or future, but all three rolled into one, endlessly generated through comings and goings of their inhabitants. I would now think that wayfinding might be understood not as following a course from one spatial location to another, but as a movement in time more akin to playing music or storytelling than to reading a map. Yes, he's an anthropologist. Storytelling is very important to his worldview. Okay, 2 case studies. I will keep them to 3 or 4 minutes each, and we're roughly on time. I worked with flute player Carla Reese in 2017 or so, and she plays Kingmar flutes, which some of you flute players may have come across. Wonderful flutes which have extra mechanisms which allow them to play quarter tones over the entire range, and they have fantastic multiphonic possibilities as well. So I worked with Carla in the studio, and the ideas of the piece is that timbre and harmony become scales and modes, so that the idea of the linear and the vertical are somehow brought together, a very sort of musical view, the whole lot within a spatialized context. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to get her to play all 4 flutes, 3 Kingmar flutes. The piccolo can't be changed because it's too small to get the Kingmar mechanism. And I did hundreds and hundreds of analyses of using Queen Mary, University of London, sonic visualizer, and I created this vast sampler on my computer of all the multiphonics, about 103. Actually, many more, but I chose 103 to combine. So I was using my ears at the same time as trying to work out strategies. So you kind of try and combine the two. Here's just a sort of flavour. And you can just read off the... sorry, that's 2015's version. I know that this is all automated now, but it really is fantastic stuff. You can... that's a 3-legged multiphonic. And, okay, we'll keep it brief. I transcribe them, yes, I use a pencil on paper. It's much quicker than me doing it in computer notation. Then I run off scales, and I try to unite the vertical, the timbral, and the horizontal, the scalar. And then Max Patch picks it up. I build my own simple sustains, granular sustains. 8 of them, first in, first out. The spatialization is intended to create an ever-changing web within which you sit. So this is a version of space that says, yes, we've discussed it already, it tends to be fixed around the center, but she is anchored on the stage, and you get all the possible combinations of 4s, whether it's this, I've written them out there. Of course, they're all on top of each other, so that you've got the various different four-ways, creating a gelatinous kind of weird space, ideally. And yes, I can map through piccolo, flute, alto, bass. That's one of my composition sketches. I can work out, but we all make mistakes, and I love the fact that I can theoretically predict what this piece will do, but I never get it right when I perform it. So it doesn't matter, because it's always changing. So I can sort of half predict what's going to happen. It's more than half, actually, but anyway. And I do believe in live electronics. Should I be using a tracker? Probably, but it will probably perform even worse than me, because I actually want to pick out very, very quiet multiphonics. And so I want a very highly intelligent second performer. So this is not a solo piece, it's a duo piece with, so far, me on the live electronics, capturing all of the multiphonics, which are then spatialized around. Right, straight through. I'll play just the tiniest example of this as time's running through. Oh. Oh, lost it somehow. I am going to run out of time, so we'll just give you 10 seconds. Very usefully, Sark made a binaural recording of this actually, which works very well, even online. And given it's completely live, and many of you know Sark, I was trying to use height as well. The piece is not designed in height with a height mode, but it can add to the sense of horizontal space to have a height component. Your imaginations are in good condition, aren't they? In this one. So, it's a journey through the multiphonics of the four instruments. Okay, finally then, an imaginary sound walk, 2 or 3 minutes of imagination. It was an essay I wrote for Sound Art Brighton that generated the piece during lockdown. I'd in fact designed a piece for Beast. Beast had asked for a piece for Birthday with a Zero in for me, and I, as everybody was, changed direction during 2020, 2021, 2022, and it became an imaginary sound walk. I live in Brighton. I created an idea which at first I just wrote down. It was an imaginary sound walk. I started at the wind farm, the Rampion wind farm, and walked around various locations, and they became real. So I did take the bus down to Saltdean and recorded on beat. No, I biked down there. It was locked down. I took my bike down there, and then as it unlocked, I went through the various places, up and up and up and up and up onto the hot air and the downs at the top there via Bluebell Wood on the 1st of May, which I'll just show in a second. Okay, so I also use instruments that are part of Stockhausen's Momenta, near and far at once. I made them myself and recorded them in the studio here. They were originally going to be the entire piece, but they become the imaginary parts of the walk. And those are, you'll have to check the score of Stockhausen's Momenta. The Zusatzinstrumenta are, the choirs all have percussion instruments as they sing, so they reinforce the language which they're singing at the time, various kinds of percussive sound with voice. So let's just get a flavour. My idea is that when I see things, I hear things. So I went, this is me, it's on my phone again, I have been out to the wind farm twice, you can take a boat out, and by the way, they're huge. Forget the land-based windmills. If you've not been up to a sea-based one, those things are 60 metres. You know, they're huge devices. And anyway, I hear stuff when I see that, so I get the account spat, and I try to think and listen both. This will be an 8 channels tonight. low-level trig, but I did A-level as well, so it was all right. Recording on the beach. Oh, sound particles. Here we go. So the idea of how pebbles actually work, or how sound works, you've got to have seashore pebbles like having Brighton at home. It's not a sandy beach today. Then, yeah, well, we've got I manipulate stereo images. Actually, the movies, by the way, are faked with respect to the sound. I did them separately, so they're not synced truly. And what I'm doing is I'm playing with stereo images. So 1 and 2 are an image, 3 and 4 are an image, and then those are moved around the space in various combinations. And I do have Little H on Studio Code. So I hear the stereos moving around, 4 stereos, will move around in various ways. We won't spend much time on Brighton Pier in this talk. This time is running out. I went around the pier. These are photos taken in winter. Silly me, because I actually recorded in the summer. And again, I brought lots of stereo recordings back and imagined myself as the flaneur and programmed Spat to be 4 of me, taking different routes. Murmurations are very important in this piece. Humans murmur, birds murmur, and the starling murmuration I've already played you, but that's a big piece of information stack on the pier itself. And you all this is one of the Stockhausen instruments. I designed this last granular high level. What I was hearing. And then through the city, the flaneur, or is it a derive, goes through the lanes and through various bits and pieces of Brighton until you get drift. You get the picture. I choose different speeds. I'm mixing so like this is roundabout ideas, rotation, slow change and change direction. So I'm combining different kinds of algebra actually and a result to create that imaginary space. The imagination first, the trigonometry second. Ditto with that's a panopto across the motorway at the top of the downs. So it's the same road. And doing an ancient mix of various combinations. So the motorway is going in every direction. You look around. I recorded a beehive 30 years ago. And here's sound particles. It doesn't quite work, it also works great on headphones. I want the bees to come towards you. Leave it repetition there. It's useful for result I'm using. I put 2 Neumann microphones inside a beehive, wore the complete rig, and had a very, very early digital recorder. That was recorded about 1982. The Bluebell Woods in Brighton and top of the Downs are wonderful. And here is my final music example coming up. I was up there during this time and recorded lots and lots and lots. It is, as many of you know who've done environmental recording, unbelievably difficult to capture a woodscape. Because you know it's the wind in the trees, but you've got to get that feel of the wind in the trees, and it's at a distance. And I'm sure I have not completely succeeded, but again, adrift. I was thinking through the various, as I say, stereo images which are drifting around, and I too am drifting through the wood as I perceive these various spaces. And on to the top of the Downs, which is a wonderful area. It's a national park. It's a UNESCO site of biosphere. It's the only UNESCO biosphere in the UK. It's the top of the Brighton Downs and along that way towards Lewes. hot air, reference to John T. Harrison, with larks descending, references elsewhere. Oh, that's the hot air on the left, and the larks are slowly approaching us on the right. The larks is a very brief story. Of course, you're up on the downs, and I haven't got my Zoom with me. I've forgotten to bring my Zoom. Forgotten, I don't carry my Zoom around everywhere, so I have to get my phone out, record wind and everything. Wonderful what digital tools will actually do with rotten recordings. Luckily, larks actually perform with a very, very narrow bandwidth, so I could wipe out the wind against the wind shots. Anyway, that's larks descending. That will be properly presented for you tonight. There is the said zoom on the trig point at the Ditchling Beacon, and there you go. I'm not going to read that out to you. I have an imaginary visual oral contract which I'm trying to work out, as you are as creative people, near and far at once, as direct engagement with the total ecosphere, and I want to revisit it sometime. Thank you.